Hello, everyone. My name is Gustavo Hinojosa Jr. I am the director for the National Cybersecurity Student Association. Today's webcast is on CompTIA certification, informational, and CTF event. This information is brought to you by Cynthia Thomas. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Cynthia Thomas. Again, if you have any questions, you can place your question in the chat box. Use the registration code to sign up for the CompTIA CTF page.
All right, thank you. So, excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming. I am Cynthia Thomas, a lecturer of cybersecurity at Northern Kentucky University. I'm also a doctoral student at the University of Louisville studying cybersecurity education. And as promised, I'm here to talk about CompTIA industry professional certs. So this is how we'll spend our time together today. But before that, I just want to make sure everyone who wants to participate in the CTF later on can. And of course, here's the information, and Dr. Gus has put that info as well into the chat. The CTF isn't open yet, so you do have some time to get registered for it during this early part of the webcast. So I'm here to, like I said, talk about CompTIA certs, and specifically that is going to be the foundational certifications. So you may or may not be familiar with CompTIA, but in a nutshell, it's a organization that develops knowledge content assessments or tests specifically for the IT profession. The CompTIA foundational cert path focuses on the technical knowledge and its application that's seen in different IT roles, right? So that's from all the way from help desk support to your security analysts. And what a certification does is that it shows that you have knowledge, even when you have limited or practical experience right out in the real world. But it helps you get your foot in the door, because employers expect to train you on how their internal systems or their overall systems operate. Certificates also let you move laterally across areas, like from IT support to a network team, or if you're on a network team, to a security team. They give you the knowledge that you would need to move into these new positions. I would say each foundational cert has concepts and topics that are categorized into these overarching areas. So what's showing here are these high-level things you should know or be able to do according to that certification. However, do notice that across each cert, there are similar things discussed, but as you move from left to right, there's always going to be this additional detail or additional layer of knowledge that's being added as the certification progresses. So the cert exam that you take depends on what you know, and the higher the cert, there's an expectation that you're going to be comfortable or familiar or have an understanding of topics or concepts from prior certs, right? The certs that come before it. Now, each cert can be taken at any time, which is great. Although CompTIA does have recommendations such as number of years of experience. But keep in mind that that recommendation of experience is just a recommendation, because you may or may not have a job in the IT field. That's okay. It doesn't mean you can't be successful on an exam. Think about the time spent studying and practicing skills, topics covered in your courses, your homework assignments, book chapters read, videos watched. All of those things are giving you experience in the form of knowledge creation. So the overarching knowledge and ability descriptions from that last slide break down to domains and objectives for each certification. And these domains are areas of knowledge, and objectives list the specific topics and concepts that fall under a domain, right? So for example, if we look at the ITF Plus domain 2.0 infrastructure, on the surface, that can cover a whole lot of area within information technology. But the 8 objectives within the domain, that starts to narrow down what we need to know. And I don't have it on this slide, but it is going to be included in the resource pack, are going to be examples of topics and concepts for each certificate domain. So since CompTIA has organized this content for each cert by domain and objective, the other thing that they do is they tell us the amount of content per domain, like under the ITF plus domain percent on the cert exam column with, yeah, the column that's showing. So if we continue with the ITF plus, that highest domain covered is 2.0 infrastructure, which has 8 objectives, but the 22% that's showing means that around 16 questions on the exam will be from that area. So the exam guides that you'll see in the resource pack, they explicitly state that what's there is not an exhaustive list, but I will say that it's robust enough that you should be able to feel secure if you have a solid understanding and foundation of what's listed there. That should make sure that you're sufficiently prepared to sit and pass an exam. Another thing is to remember that CompTIA exams, they test a totality of knowledge in chunks. And these chunks are based on industry standards and practices. But because of what you see out in the real world in these organizations, it can be very different or very similar. You'll definitely want to make sure you have an understanding of everything that you may see on the exam. So just because a certain domain is only covered, let's say in the ITF plus, we see one of the domains only has 3 objectives and is only 11% of the exam, that does not mean you should spend less time on that area, right? Always approach how you study and what you're studying with consistency and being intentional. So a way to kind of think about the top covered domains within the foundational cert series is that the ones with the highest percent covered are going to give you your base knowledge of the things that you should be familiar with. The next highest percent that's covered is going to establish what I think of as depth, right? Depth knowledge. So for example, with the A+ Core 1 certificate, you have the top domain of hardware and troubleshooting as the highest, and how devices can communicate and transmit data, i.e. networking, would be the next logical thing to know about. So with the CompTIA Foundational Cert Series, your ITF Plus, A+, and Network Plus, they're covering this base and depth knowledge that's needed for the Security Plus exam, which you can also think of as this specialized knowledge, because you need to know and or at least be comfortable with the topics and concepts from the A+ all the way, or excuse me, the ITF Plus all the way to Network Plus to have that solid foundation for the Security Plus, right? So let's say what devices make up an organization's infrastructure, how these devices operate independently and when connected together in a network, the things that can make a device not work, whether that's a broken component, a misconfiguration, or even malware, all the way to how to identify and fix the things that are broken or maybe don't provide enough security. All of those things need to be in your mind and thought about as you sit for some of the higher exams, like the ones that come from Security Plus and beyond. And just as an example, here's an example question from the Security Plus exam. And the highlighted parts of the question, they relate to the base and depth knowledge that you need. And what I've done is I've kind of mapped those to the prior foundational certs from CompTIA that either introduce the topic as well as the domain or the specific objective that it's covered. And since this is from the Security Plus exam, or our answer choices are, of course, going to be security related. However, even though this is an example of a Security Plus exam and the answer questions, you're still going to get a taste or exposure to some of these topics from the early certs, which is something that's really nice about CompTIA today, right? Although the exams are very structured in terms of content, there's still this blending or mingling that's going on, which is really helpful for knowledge building overall. So when I started my cert journey, you had to start with the A+ and work your way up. The domains were definitely more rigid. So aspects of like security and networking would either be covered, would either not be covered or minimally covered when in A+, and all of that. So I think CompTIA's approach today is definitely a lot more realistic. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding or just more information about our CompTIA foundational certs, the next big thing, of course, is looking at how to prepare. And I get the main thing is to study, but since we're all busy, we have different responsibilities that take priority at any moment, we want to make sure we study as efficiently as possible, because cramming has its uses, but honestly, it's only good for temporary knowledge gains. Like, so for future computing for professionals such as yourselves, we need to think about studying for longevity, where the study process allows you to retain and pull up knowledge when needed during and after test time. And so a good thing about the CompTIA certs is that they are kept generic on purpose, meaning they're not overly brand specific. So, I mean, if you're thinking about things like, well, what about Windows and Mac and Linux? Yes, those are definitely very specific. However, the specificity that I'm referring to would be details like a financial institution's or bank's network compared to a local library's network. So the only things that you would expect to see at both would be the concepts and topics covered on exam. And since there's this air of just being very general, this of course is going to open up a lot of options of where you can get and learn from outside resources, which I've kind of organized by a way that can fit a preference or a situation. So of course, your top resources are going to be CompTIA endorsed study guides. And these are some really good authors who make sure that they cover CompTIA certification content, but also provide information, or I should say provide extra information, right? So extra information related to the exam domain and objectives, but also information that can be helpful and connect back to concepts and real world type of things outside of the exam itself. And so these study guides are basically books, and they often have review questions. They discuss the CompTIA exam process as well. CompTIA also has a number of options for delivering their content, but as you can see in that very middle part of the slide, it can be pretty expensive. But if you're just looking at the study guides themselves, these books, that is going to be your most feasible option. And a lot of times they also come with additional supplemental material, like discounted access to other resources, and maybe even discounted exam vouchers as well. So after our CompTIA endorsed resources, we also have what I consider to be structured study resources, which basically gives you everything in one place. So that's all the content you need, but usually in different forms and also in chunks. So I tend to think of structured studying as these courses that become available. Excuse me. So with the structured studying approach, it's all about efficiency and diversity of how you get the content. But there's usually some kind of cost. It's going to be less than CompTIA's options. However, depending on the structured studying resource you go with, it may not be as thorough if it's not based on a CompTIA exam. So for example, the Cisco Skills for All, the Skills for All with Cisco, and also the Open Learn, those are free options, and they're going to give you the content that you'll need, but it may not be as specific to CompTIA. And so you'll want to definitely use these type of resources if you're looking for that all-in-one approach, or if you want someone else to kind of do that heavy lifting of gathering resources, putting them and putting everything together. And so that way you're only responsible for learning and studying. That's it. The last approach, and is actually the one that I prefer, is the budget-friendly type, but it's also the one that's going to require the most work. And these are going to be, your regular, good old websites and YouTube channels. And I like this approach because it's free, but also because it doesn't limit or restrict you to what's covered, like with the CompTIA resources or the structured study approach. What's showing are a few of my favorite sites and channels that I've found or have been recommended to me. But I will say that I do have a couple of cautions just based on my own experience. First is to not get caught up in rabbit holes when you're taking this approach. Remember that the goal is to learn about content that's on a CompTIA exam. So yeah, an in-depth review of digital forensics is cool, but how helpful is knowing that text files can be hidden inside images? Is that actually going to be really helpful for your A+ or network exam? No, but it is cool to know. The second thing is to make sure that your budget-friendly resources come from reputable sources, right? There's a lot of information that's out there. So double check who is saying what, and also don't rely on just one source for all things with this particular type of approach. Now, once we have our go-to resources, the next step is studying wisely. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's this model called the study cycle that describes a process for helping students learn who are taking taking structured courses within a college or university setting. But if you're working towards a certification, most of the time you'll be studying independently, right? So even if you're currently in school, your courses may be based on CompTIA content, but there may not be enough time to cover all the topics and concepts in the depth that's needed to pass an exam. So what I've done is kind of modified this study cycle model to just kind of pull out the relevant parts for what I considered the independent study cycle. And that's going to be reviewing, studying, and checking your understanding. And a key thing with each of these aspects is to mix things up. So that would not just be reading and taking notes, but also actively engaging with your study material, right? So that's how you move from just memorizing to being able to critically think things through and being able to apply or distinguish a correct approach to solve a problem. So within the independent study cycle, the reviewing portion should be thought of as getting to the big picture, right? So in the case of the CERT exam prep, that's also going to include things not related to the domain and objective content. So it's basically understanding what the exam entails, which is what those earlier slides kind of dived into a little bit, right? The reviewing portion also includes finding a test location, reading up on that location's test-taking policies, organizing your study resources by content areas, making a study plan like, okay, so this week I'm reviewing A+ domain 1 content, but oh yeah, I also need to find a few more resources on X topic, right? So those kinds of details. Now, I know that it may seem tedious or even obvious, but I promise the more organized and considerate of these little things you are, the better off you're going to be. So the next part is the meat of the independent study cycle, and that's actually studying. But it's more than just opening a book or watching videos, right? Because knowledge is created from good study habits. Good study habits are created from good study practices. And some of those good study practices are what's listed here. And I'll reiterate that the main thing here is to mix things up, try out different practices and reflect on what works for you and use it. So one of my go-tos is reading and taking notes and then summarizing my notes in my own words, right? To basically create my own study guide. Is it a long process? Yes, but it's so helpful for me to recall stuff and have some clarity in terms of gaining an understanding. I had to kind of do different things to allow me to get to have a study process that is very efficient and effective for me. And it's taken a few different iterations to get to this point. Another thing is to be mindful of your study environment. Where do you work best? I prefer quiet places or even being outside when the weather is nice. Some of you may like a little more noise, like at a coffee shop, right? It's whatever you end up doing. Just be consistent and also be flexible. Sometimes a study session is going to be more productive than others. Make sure you give yourself some grace because studying is a journey of learning, right? It's a process that's going to take time, but it can be smooth and worthwhile if we have this right preparation. The last part of the study cycle, of the independent study cycle, is checking your understanding, which is basically evaluating what you know and how well you know it. And one of the easiest ways to do this is, of course, with practice tests. I recommend going with tests based on CompTIA exams, the exam that you plan to take. So questions at the end of a study guide or the practice exams that usually come with the study guide to me, are the most helpful. There are a lot of books dedicated just to the CompTIA exams, right, where you're just getting a bunch of questions, and those are good, but you'll want to make sure that you're getting a book that is for the current version of the exam, and if possible, certified by CompTIA, because it's going to go through a rigorous process. An important aspect of CompTIA cert exams is that they also check your knowledge and understanding with performance-based questions, or PBQs. And these are your hands-on questions that allow you to demonstrate what you know. And for the foundational cert series, you'd see these types of questions in the A+, Network Plus, and the Security Plus exams. So with the PBQs, in terms of getting prepared for the exam, the PBQ practice means getting this practical experience beyond the static type of resources, which are books, your websites, and your video resources. So with the PBQs, I tend to think of them as you're able to get your hands dirty, right? Metaphorically speaking. And so it's where you're going to actually apply and show what you know. And what's listed here are a few sources that let you get some of that practice. Some of these are free, some have a small fee associated with it, and some are going to require a little more work, particularly for the GNS3, where you're going to be using different, or creating your own networks using different components and stuff. But the point here is to make sure you get enough hands-on experience, because you will see these questions on your exams, right? Because just watching someone perform the task in a video is likely not enough, because studying and learning is about repetition, and it's about practice. And I know we saw this slide earlier, but I just wanted to bring it back because I wanted to make sure that, or not make sure, but just kind of confirm that the number of questions in an exam from the A+ to the Security Plus, the number of multiple choice questions you're going to see, they don't actually add up to the total number expected, right? So, and that's because the remaining questions are likely going to be your PBQs, And so with the PBQs, you're going to see, they're going to be inclusive of concepts from the different domains and objectives within a cert. Kind of like here, which is, this is just an example performance-based question from the Security Plus exam version that's set to retire in July of 24. And within this question, we're presented with information that gives us the background, right? What the issue is, and also extra information to help guide our actions. Some of the specific things that we need to do are given in this instruction section. And the way that I've broken it down is that our first task is to find an IP address of the workstations. The second task is to see which workstation can't reach the internet. And then the third task is kind of multi-part, because first we need to see how the router interfaces are configured. And then we also need to check the configured ACL list of that router. And then of course, task 4 is making sure that the problematic workstation can actually get to the internet. So in each PBQ though, you're gonna be limited by what you can do and what you can actually access, which is okay. It's cool in terms of letting, or limiting some of the distractions, but not all the time. But I would say most of the time, it just depends on the PBQ itself and what is actually being, and what you're actually being asked to do. And so just for, just to show what this PBQ is, I have this very short recording of me completing the task from the questions. And also just to kind of show what how the limitations are with these PBQs, because we know that with troubleshooting, there's a lot of different things you can do, but because it's a test environment, they want to keep us restricted or confined to certain things. So right now, just pulling up workstation 1 and workstation 2, checking the IP addresses that are configured, and from there, looking at or gathering some of the router information. And notice that the router, we can't do anything with the router itself, but we're only presented with this configuration information. The only clickable thing, or the next clickable thing, is looking at the access control list. And so from here, we've already completed task 1, checking IP addresses. Now we need to see which workstation can or cannot get off the internet or get to the internet. And this is just showing how we can approach problems in different ways, but again, due to the limitations of the environment, we're stuck with trying to use the most basic of things. And of course, if we're checking network connectivity, our favorite and most useful command is going to be ping. And so in the recording, I'm using ping to test workstation 1 first. It can reach the internet. So obviously workstation 2 can't reach the internet, but you want to complete the process to make sure that you're able to get all of the points, I guess you can say, for these performance-based questions. because I'm not sure how CompTIA addresses incorrect commands, but I do know that they may penalize if you don't perform certain actions. So coming back to the router, just kind of looking at the access control list, I see that things look pretty normal, but when I get to entry number 5, that area right there, or that IP address networking scheme there, is a little off compared to all of the others. So based on the question, we remove that ACL entry. And finally, we have to come back to task number 4, which is to make sure that workstation 2 can actually get to the internet. And so I want to caution you about these performance-based questions in terms of being careful about doing too much. Always keep in mind the instructions and the actual actions that you're supposed to perform. And I guess just to kind of don't do that. And just to kind of complete this example, I'm putting up how I figured out that that the ACL number 5 was wrong. But please note that when you sit for your exam, you're not going to have access to a subnet calculator. But this is just for, educational purposes, I guess you could say. So the thing to get out of and remember from that example is that the base and that depth knowledge for the Security Plus PBQ came from Network Plus, right? So if we're talking about just the latest version of the Security Plus exam, which is 701, that question, that PBQ question, falls under domain 2 because of its reference to a DMZ. So the number of PBQs that you'll see are going to vary, but I would say there's probably going to be 3 or 4 on each exam, and each is going to ask you to demonstrate something different, but they're always going to be on topics or concepts from that exam that you're sitting for, but also are going to include topics or concepts or ideas, however, from prior exams, prior certs as well. So to put a bow on our independent study cycle, I just want to kind of make sure that you're aware that you can approach this in different ways. And what I've given you today are just some of the ways to help you get started. But the main takeaway is to make your approach your own. Try out some of the things that are listed in these slides. Use some of the resource provided. Definitely go out and find your own resources, but just be intentional with what you do to make it fit your needs and to make it fit how it works for you. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. And by that, I mean the CERT CTF. What I've done is I've created I guess a beta version or a pilot version of a check your understanding tool. And it's a jeopardy-style CTF. So of course the questions are going to be multiple choice. And these questions were developed from CompTIA endorsed study material, but there's no performance-based questions since this is an early version of the application. When you access the challenge, you'll just select a radio button and then hit submit. But if you want a little extra help, please use the hints. But since this is a check your understanding tool that falls within the independent study cycle, the answers are not just given to you, right? Or in terms of the hints. Instead, when you select a hint, you'll see a list of resources that you can review. And also depending on the number, I guess depending on the challenge, I should say, the number of resources and the type of resources available are going to be different. So remember that this CTF is meant to be a learning tool. And it's not just a way to see if you know something, but the resources that are there are are going to help, are going to give you more information to help your understanding for answering the challenges. And of course, there's no penalty for using hints because this is a learning safe environment. I guess, well, one other thing I'll say is that the questions there, they only cover the top 2 CompTIA cert domains from ITF Plus to Security Plus, except for Network Plus, which has the top 3. There's no time limit for answering a question, but there is a time limit for the CTF overall. And of course, you can move between domains. And this CTF, I'm sorry, I'm hope I'm not being too repetitive, but I just want to make clear that it's an informative tool. It's a guide to help you get a sense of what you know. So don't think that if you don't know something or are unsure of an answer, it's not an indicator that you shouldn't be in an IT field or considering another discipline or even sitting for one of these exams, right? I'm sure you're aware of that, but I just wanted to make sure that I put that out there. Here's some extra info, but I see that we're almost out of time and I want to be respectful. So I'll leave this up and I'll go ahead. If you haven't already, let me get to the main thing. If you haven't already and you want to participate in the CTF, here's the address, the URL to the landing page. Here's the registration code. And if you give me 2 seconds, I will go ahead and unpause the event. And let me get to it. Settings. Yes, I will unpause the event. I'm hitting update right now. I got confirmation that it is unpaused, and you may need to refresh or restart your browser for it, but you should be able to start accessing the challenges. If you can't, please post to the chat, and I'm going to mute myself. Have fun.